According to the theory of evolution, the origin and development of the universe and all its systems can be explained solely on the basis of time, chance, and continuing processes. All living things have arisen from a single-celled organism. A second and opposing worldview is the concept of creation. According to the theory of creation, everything in the universe has come into being through the design, purpose, and deliberate acts of a supernatural creator. That means this creator created the universe, the earth, and all life on earth, including all types of plants and animals, as well as humans. On today's edition of Origins, was your ancestor really an ape?
Hello, my friends. Welcome to Origins. I'm Donn Chapman, your host, and have a great show for you today. I think we get really to the heart of the matter. Did man come from apes, or did God make man? I think it all comes down to that. Our guest is Dr. Terry Mortensen, and he's from Answers in Genesis, and I think he's got some pertinent information for us today. So, was your ancestor an ape, Terry?
Not at all.
Not at all. Good.
No.
I remember the old thing that if you have to tell a lie, tell a big one and tell it often enough, and pretty soon people believe it. Is that sort of where we are?
Oh, absolutely. On this issue, that's what's happening. I'm sure all of our viewers have seen this picture of apes evolving into man, and we're taught that it's fact, and we're taught often that it's fact, even in the public media. March 1994, Time magazine, How Man Began, just teaching us straight that we evolved from apes. 2000 Time, How Apes Became Human.
It's always a new discovery.
Yep, yeah. August 2002, National Geographic, which goes all over the world,
right,
and pointing to this. And then Scientific American in 2003 devoted a whole issue to this subject of convincing the public that we've evolved from apes.
It's like they can't lose their monopoly. They've got to keep telling us that. Well, what's wrong with that view of man, Terry?
Well, let's look at that.
Okay.
The evolutionists believe in the tree of life. They believe that all living things descended from a common ancestor, and then we can look at that tree by just one branch dealing with hominids, and they believe that all the orangutan, chimpanzee, gorilla, and people are all descended from a common ancestor. And so they have this nice, neat tree. Now, we need to understand how the creationists view this fossil and living evidence, and we call that, I like to call that the creation forest of life. And we believe that the orangutans are probably always a distinct type of creature. The chimpanzees and gorilla may have a common ancestor. The Australopithecines were probably a common form that became extinct. And then man was always man, and Neanderthal and Homo erectus were they were true humans, just had some unusual physical features. So let's look at that, whether the scientific and other evidence supports the evolution tree of life or the creation forest of life. One of the key evidences that have been used to support evolution is Neanderthal man. And Neanderthal fossils were found in 1856 in the Neander Valley of Germany. And that's how they drew Neanderthal back in 1856. Kind of stooped over and lots of hair. But they found a lot more fossils in the last century and a half. And there are many evolutionists today who would say that actually Neanderthals were human. They interbred with humans. And this is actually a a statue of a Neanderthal in the Neanderthal Museum in Germany.
Which is run by evolutionists.
Which is run by evolutionists.
So even the evolutionists today have him standing up straight and tall, and you said to me before the show that if you ran into that man in the bus station in New York City, you wouldn't even think of him different than someone else.
That's right. So there's a lot of controversy. Some evolutionists are saying, no, they're subhuman, and some are saying, no, they were humans.
Fully human.
Yep. But of course, people will say, oh, but they had primitive tools.
Yeah. Is that a picture from 20 million years ago?
No, these are Aborigines, and these people are not primitive. Many Aborigines go on to university and study, and we might look at them and in our pride in the Western world say, well, they're really primitive, but I wouldn't want to try and survive where they live without the skills that they have with boomerangs. And
so the difference is not a difference in kind, it's a difference in culture.
That's right.
Yes.
And it's really Western arrogance to say that our culture is superior to theirs.
But when we talk about these transitional forms, they all lived in caves. Like caveman couldn't have been fully human, could he?
Yeah, well, he could. We find in the caves by the Dead Sea that back in the 1940s, they found scrolls. And they were the scrolls of the Bible. They had the Essenes, a Jewish sect, were living in those caves 2,000 years ago. In fact, if we look at the Bible carefully, the Bible talks about in Hebrews 11 that men of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. The Bible tells us that Lot, Elijah, and David lived in caves.
That's true.
And Sarah, Jacob, and Lazarus were buried in caves. So there's
that
nothing.
Didn't make him any less human, did it?
No, no. You know, and some people
There's
still
a
live
cave
in
dweller
caves today. Yeah. Well, let's look at some of the other evidence that the evolutionists have used for evolution, and it's not a really pretty story. Piltdown Man was the evidence presented in 1912 to the public, and the evidence that they had for Piltdown Man was a piece of jaw, 2 molar teeth, and a piece of skull. That's all the evidence that they had.
A piece of jaw, 2 teeth, and a skull.
That's right. Okay. And they were able to draw a picture of what Piltdown Man looked at. He's called Piltdown because he was found in a quarry in Piltdown, England. And the confident interpretation of this skimpy evidence was published in the London Illustrated News in 1912. A discovery of supreme importance to all those interested in the history of human race was announced at the Geological Society of London on Wednesday evening, December 18th. A part of the jaw, a portion of the skull of the most ancient, the article said 500,000-year-old inhabitant of England, if not of Europe. The remains thus far removed leave no possible doubt. Look at the confidence here. No possible doubt, but that they represent not merely a fossil man, but a man who must be regarded as affording us a link with our remote ancestors, the apes. Well, that was 1912. The fossils went into the Natural History Museum in London, and other scientists said, we'd like to look at those fossils. And the museum said, well, we'd be happy to send you plaster casts of the fossils. And they said, no, we'd like to see the actual fossils. Well, we'd be happy to send you the plaster cast. This went on until 1953, which was the year I was born. And they investigated these bones very carefully, and they found, this was evolutionists now investigating, they found that the teeth and the jaw bones were from an orangutan that had died about 50 years earlier. The skull bone was completely human, and when they looked at the teeth under the microscope, they found that the teeth had been filed down, and they did chemical analysis and showed that the bones had been artificially colored.
Now I want to ask you a question about that. You said that they would send them plaster Paris copies. They wouldn't let them look at the real bones for about 40 years. Do you think that the people running the museum knew this was a hoax all along?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so they were deliberately deceiving the people.
That's right. In fact, of course, the question immediately came, who perpetrated the hoax? And it was another 40 years before people felt like they had a pretty good case. And we can't prove it in court, but it looks like these were the perpetrators. Charles Dawson, the one who discovered the fossils, Teilhard de Chardin, a French Jesuit priest and paleontologist, and then some of the highest scientific experts in British science in the British Museum.
Now, what's the motivation behind that, Terry?
Well, the motivation is that they believe evolution is true, and they want to convince the rest of the world that it's true. And I believe that ultimately the motivation is a hostility to the Bible and to Christianity.
You know, I just want to say a personal word here, and that is that I can really respect people I don't agree with if I understand that they're truly seeking the truth. And the most disillusioning thing to me as I've entered into this whole area of studying evolution by having great guests like you is that the other side is so disingenuous.
Yeah.
That they aren't looking for truth. They're just looking to create evidence to perpetuate a lie.
Yeah, that happens very often. But sometimes it's just innocent, wrong interpretations.
Right.
Here's an example of that. Nebraska man. They had the picture of Nebraska man and his wife and what they were doing, you know.
Yeah.
And the confident interpretation was that this was an ape man, about 500,000 years old. And what was the evidence for this creature? A single tooth. They reconstructed the whole scene from a single tooth.
Think of that.
And but that was 1922. Now this was key evidence in the Scopes evolution trial in Dayton, Tennessee in 1925. The evolutionists made a mockery of creationists.
And the evidence was Nebraska man.
That was one of the pieces of evidence. But just 3 years after that trial, they said, oops, we made a mistake. And they said, actually, we made a mistake. This was actually the tooth of an extinct species of pig. That was 1928. But I can pretty well guarantee you that most of the people who heard the evidence that the press reported at the Scopes trial never heard the reinterpretation. But that's not the end of the story. In 1972, they had to say, oops, we made a mistake again. It's not the tooth of an extinct species of pig. It's the tooth of an existing species of pig, some specimens of which are living in Paraguay today.
So it isn't even ancient.
No.
It's current.
And so this is an example of misinterpretation from very skimpy evidence.
Now, I do have to say that I think that that is a photograph and not a drawing. I think that guy played defensive end at the University of Nebraska, but that's just speculation on my part.
Okay. Well, let's look at some other evidence here. When I saw this in National Geographic back in 2000, I just couldn't believe it. There was a one-page article with a picture of these 7 bones here. And they told us, the title was called Behind the Scenes, and they said this. They said, it's hard to find someone who can draw a realistic-looking early hominid, that is, an ape man. That's why the Geographic's art department conducted a search for new talent. 4 artists were picked to receive casts of a 2-million-year-old female Homo habilis fossils on the left. Now, they've already decided what it was.
Yes.
From these bits of evidence, notice, just bits of evidence, they were to sketch in skeletal and fleshed out form the hominid to whom the bones belonged. Each artist had 2 weeks, just 2 weeks, with the bones before they were just sent on to the next persons, says the coordinator, Chris Hanna. Now, you've just got little bits of evidence, no hand bones, no feet bones.
I'm counting 6 little scraps of bone there.
That's right.
Okay.
And they've got 2 weeks to look at that and draw a complete skeleton and what the creature looked like when it was alive. They go on to say this in the article. Research was completely up to the individual. That's why their work looks so different. There's no one way to draw her. Paleoanthropologists reviewed the results. Intrigued with all the 4 entries, the art department has invited the artists to paint finished versions based on input from the consultants. But the consultants don't have any more evidence than the artists had.
They're doing their own research.
Right. Now, let's look at the finished product. What did these 4 artists draw? This is on the same page of the National Geographic. Here they are. Now, I want you to notice some things. The ratio of the distance of the arms to the legs in humans is 3/4 to 1. Okay. In a monkey, it's 1 to 1. The arms are the same length as the legs. Now notice, they have the same fossil evidence. That's human length bone-leg ratios. But look at this one.
Yeah, touching their knees.
They're touching the knees down here. And look at, they all had the same fossil evidence, but look at the different heads.
Yes.
And look at the hands.
Yeah.
They didn't have any hand bones, but those are drawn to look like ape men.
Yes.
And so you see that this is really not science, this is art. This is imagination.
Again. This is not science, this is art.
Yep.
And yet it's perpetuated on the American people as if it's scientific fact.
Yeah. Here's a statement, 1992, I could multiply these. An expert on paleoanthropology He says, there can hardly be any other subject so contentious as human evolution. Every fossil discovery, every new scientific technique that is applied, every speculation, all unleash a cascade of disagreements with unresolved and fiercely debated conclusions. In fact, almost every fossil they dig up, they give a new species name to. And so it's just a tremendously confusing situation. Dr. Weimer goes on to say, perhaps the most intriguing discussion is their attempt to define just when, where, how, and why we are human. Now, the evolutionists don't know when, where, how, and why we are human.
Isn't that amazing? We got to take a break right now, but when we come back, Terry's going to join me down here at the desk, and we're going to look into God's Word, and we're going to talk about what makes us human and how God made us. So don't go away. You aren't going to want to miss this one. We'll be back in a minute.
Creation versus evolution, you weigh the evidence. Evolution deception, contradicting confab. Evolutionists say that human beings evolved from simple cells entirely by random chance. But when the word evolving is used with technology, it means improvements that are planned, carefully worked out, and implemented using intelligent guidance. However, when academia uses the word evolution in biology, they shift its meaning to deny any planning or intelligent design. Are you being deceived by evolutionists? Today's guest on Origins, Dr. Terry Mortensen, is also the author of a new book entitled The Great Turning Point. You'll definitely want this book for your personal library. Book orders are being taken at 1-800-778-3390. That's 1-800-778-3390. Dr. Mortensen is also a speaker, researcher, and writer for Answers in Genesis. For more information, write to Answers in Genesis, P.O. Box 510, Hebron, Kentucky 41048, or visit them online at www.answersingenesis.org.
Welcome back, my friend, to Origins. I'm here with Dr. Terry Mortensen. And Terry, just before we went to our break, you read an amazing quote by a rather famous evolutionist, John Weimer, and he said, perhaps the most intriguing discussion is their attempt to define just when, where, how, and why we are human. These poor folks don't know why we're human. I believe the Bible is the place we go to get our definition, and I'd like for you to talk about that.
Well, let's look at a very important verse in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. It says in chapter 2, verse 7, Then the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. That is a very, very important verse, and I'd like to go up to the board and just diagram that because it's really revealing about the origin of man.
You go for it.
We want to break this verse down just very simply into kind of an equation.
Okay.
So we look at what the Bible has to say, and it says that God made man from the dust of the earth. He added the divine breath, and that became a living creature. The Hebrew word here is nephesh chaya, which is translated living creature. And it's also used in Genesis 1 to describe the sea creatures and the birds and the land animals. They also were living creatures. And so God made man, added the divine breath, it became a living creature. A lot of people think that we can just add evolution to the Bible. They're called theistic evolutionists. They believe that God used evolution to create the world and create man. But this verse stands as a brick wall on that idea, because the order of the verse just precludes any possible interpretation like that. Because what the evolutionists believe is contrary to what even Paul said. He said, the first man, Adam, became a living soul. So he's just completely consistent with Genesis.
Right.
But here's what the theistic evolutionist believes. That God took a living creature, added the divine breath, and it became a man. Some kind of ape-like creature, added the divine breath, and became man. But you see, the order is just completely backwards.
That's right.
And so it's really not interpreting the Bible correctly. It's just ignoring what the Bible has to say. So God supernaturally made man. Man was made man at the very beginning, and he's not a descendant from any other creature. And then we read in Genesis that man was not primitive originally. Man was very intelligent. Adam was born, created, talking to God. And he was very intelligent. He knew how to care for a garden. He was a gardener. He wasn't out there a berry gatherer just scrounging around for food to survive. His son Cain built a city.
Built a city.
He built a city 6 generations after Cain. Some people were tent-dwelling herdsmen. So man didn't go from tent-dwelling herdsmen up to living in cities. Went the other way around. And also others we see in chapter 4, they were gifted musicians, they were miners, they were developed skill in metalworking. So early man was not primitive as the evolutionists lead us to believe. So you say, okay, well, what do we do with all those people that we see in the fossil record? They are not before Adam, they're after Adam. And it only takes a very short time to change a sophisticated culture into a primitive culture. So in the creationist view, the fossil record supports the creationist view. There were no ape men. That is imagination. That's not truth. And so we believe that the Neanderthals, the Homo erectus, the Cro-Magnon were fully human. They just had some different facial features or bone structures, as well as Caucasian, the Negroid, the Mongoloid, were all descended from Noah and his family, which were all descended from Adam and Eve. So it's human variation within humankind, but we didn't evolve from some other kind of creature.
Boy, that sure makes sense to me.
Yeah, it fits what we see in the world. It fits what we see in the fossil record. Well, people say, well, how did people all get to the different continents? It was very easy. For most of the people, they could just walk from to Africa, from Mount Ararat region, the Tower of Babel, up into Europe. Here, they might have needed to use boats, but their ancestor Noah built a huge ark. They had the technology to build boats. And even Thor Heyerdahl many years ago showed that with a very simple boat he could sail all the way across from Africa to Latin America. Creationists believe that the Ice Age was a post-flood period caused actually by the unique conditions of the flood. And so the ocean is very shallow between eastern Russia and Alaska, and they could have actually walked across on dry land. So it's very understandable how we got the people spread about. Here's an evolutionist. There's a popular image of human evolution that you'll find all over the place. On the left of the picture there's an ape, on the right a man. Between the two is a succession of figures that become ever more like humans. Our progress from the ape to the human looks so smooth, so tidy. It's such a beguiling image that even the experts are loath to let it go. But it is an illusion.
But it is an illusion. And again, this is just an honest evolutionist making that statement.
Yep. And let's look at the picture that we started with. There was that picture that we've all been brainwashed to believe is truth. And this evolutionary scientist is honest enough to tell us it is an illusion. If I believe that I am descended from an ape, then morality is relative, and it's just the law of the jungle.
I wonder how much of evolution is really just man trying to get out from accountability to God.
I think that is really at the heart of it.
I do too. And I'm so glad for the evidence that you've given us, because I think many of our viewers don't understand that there simply isn't any evidence to support these pictures that were shown. That even evolutionists today are saying it's an illusion. You know, my friends, I'm so glad you've been with us today, and I hope that God has used this time with Dr. Terry Mortensen in your life to debunk the lie that perhaps you've assumed to be true, and to come back to the truth that you have a Creator. And your Creator loved you so that when you fell into sin, He became your Savior. And if you'll trust Jesus and Him alone, you'll have eternal life. You won't be a monkey. You'll be a man who will be transformed into an eternal creature who will be with God forever. If you have questions that you would love for us to deal with on Origins, be sure and write me at Origins CTV, Wall, PA, or at the address there, the email address on the screen, and we'll be happy to answer you or to find the answers from experts that we'll come in contact with and get them to you. You know, there's a lot of stuff out there today that people are trying to make us believe, but I want you to know this. God's view is that He created you, and that ought to be your worldview too. I'll be back soon, and I hope you'll be here to join me. God bless you until then. Bye-bye, my friends.
Thank you for watching this edition of Origins. If you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint information presented today, you can download a PDF file of program number 713 from our website at www.originstv.org. Or for a DVD of this series, send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins program number 713, Cornerstone Television, Wall, Pennsylvania 15148.
Origins is made possible by the faithful prayers and the financial support of you, our Cornerstone Television family.